Pues empezamos de una vez. Julia, Carlos, gracias por estar aquí. La verdad que durante todo este proceso de elección han sido ustedes, para mí, la referencia de qué pensar, qué ver, qué reflexionar sobre la elección de Estados Unidos. Y lo digo también porque creo que generacionalmente hablando, a mí me ha enriquecido mucho hablar con ustedes. Evidentemente son mucho más jóvenes que yo. Y el mundo es, particularmente en Estados Unidos y en México, es de sus generaciones, aunque ya ustedes también van saliendo y ya viene un montón de gente debajo de ustedes, pero entender el punto de vista, porque yo creo que lo que estamos viendo de las elecciones en Estados Unidos no es solamente qué va a pasar los próximos 4 años, me parece que es un trendsetter para qué está pasando en el mundo. Así que me encanta tener la posibilidad de hablar con ustedes. Me encanta su podcast, Burros y Elefantes. A los que no lo hayan oído, se los recomiendo muchísimo. No sé qué van a hacer. Una pregunta que les voy a hacer es qué van a hacer después de las elecciones con su podcast. Me imagino que dará que hablar después, pero bienvenida, Julia. ¿Cómo estás?
Muchas gracias, Emilio, por la invitación. Feliz de estar aquí contigo y con todos ustedes. Son días muy intensos, ahora sí que estamos en la recta final de la elección, pero también llevamos varias semanas en la elección porque como seguro ya vamos a hablar de eso, muchísima gente ya votó, entonces hay indicaciones que están interesantes que seguro vamos a discutir, entonces muy emocionada de estar aquí contigo y con Carlos, obviamente mi co-conductor de Burros y Elefantes.
Muy bien. Hola, Carlos. ¿Cómo estás?
Hola Emilio, bien, ¿y tú? Gracias por la invitación. Y sí, como menciona Julia, cuando empezamos Burros y Elefantes, creo que hubiéramos predicho la mitad de las cosas que han pasado en estos últimos 6 meses, no lo veíamos venir. Y esta sería una de las primeras veces en las que Julia y yo nos unimos a platicar de la elección, un tipo de podcast en vivo, ¿no? Desde el webinar.
Muy bien. Y bueno, we're going to switch to English, if that's okay with you. Again, I started in automatic in Spanish, but we're going to do this in English. I think it's relevant because we're talking about the U.S. election, so we'll do it in English. And again, with Julia and with Carlos. I don't know if your podcast has an English name or you always use Burros y Elefantes.
We always use Burros y Elefantes because it's a Spanish-speaking podcast about American elections, and so we only use Burros y Elefantes, and I think that the translation donkeys and elephants is not so witty, and so we're going to stick to the Spanish name only.
I agree. When I was going to translate it, I say this doesn't sound right, but in Spanish it's super catchy. So it's great to have you here. I think you are my go-to source on understanding the U.S. election, more so this one. And as I said in Spanish at the beginning, not only because your level of expertise, which is amazing, and so really congratulations. You are extremely talented and extremely insightful. And I know you do your homework, so you spend a lot of time researching. And so I respect that. And also, generationally, I think it's extremely relevant that we listen to you. I think one of the things that I see, and also in Mexico, and we've talked about this with both of you, but I think in the US too, when I see the demographics of Congress, Senate, private sector chambers, etc., I do not see a representation of the demographics of the US and Mexico. And I think this is part of why we are here and why it has to change. So, I mean, I'll go a little bit of off script there, but I don't know your thoughts on that, on the demographics of the associations, chambers of the private sector, mostly male. I am the young one in many of these organizations, and I'm 50 years old. That's not reflecting of what the population is all about. So where do you see the impact of this on policy, etc.?
Yeah, well, thank you for always setting a stage for young voices, and we really appreciate that. We can definitely see, I think there is a shift, and might talk about this further on, but we are starting to see a shift within the Democratic Party, especially towards the younger leaders of the party. And even though the party's leaders are very old and white, and especially, I mean, this is going a bit down the road, but if the Democratic Party has a trifecta in power, meaning they hold the Senate, the House, and the White House, that would be 3 white leaders, old, like older than 78, I think, all 3 of them. And so I think that's the last time we're going to see that within the party. I think we are seeing younger and more representational of the Democratic, not only of the Democratic Party, but also of the demographics of the country. And we see that in leaders such as not only Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which is like the like the poster child in that sense, but also we see younger leaders locally. We see younger leaders running for the House in like they're not very media focused campaigns. And so I think we will have a change within the demographics of the Democratic Party, and it's only for the better, because we truly need a change, not only in politics, but also, as you've said, in the private industry and the chambers, etc. And so hopefully this democratic shift within the party will push to other shifts in other industries, hopefully.
Now, with that, Carlos, let me ask you a question. Julia is speaking about the Democratic Party, and I get it. I still see age-wise, I think they do a little bit better gender-wise, but I think age-wise is still a big, big gap. Even Ocasio-Cortez, I don't know how old she is, but I mean, is really talking about in Mexico, for example, 75% of the population is less than 39 years old. So that's when I talk about really, really young base. But what's your thought on the Republican Party? Because for me, this is one of the things that, regardless of the outcome of the election, which the odds go to Biden, and we'll talk about that. But regardless of that, do you see them changing? Do you see them saying, listen, guys, we have to get it, that this is not the path? I think that all Republican mindset, even though I don't think Donald Trump is a Republican, we'll talk about that too, but do you see them changing?
This is an interesting question, and it's a question that has been, I think, debated among the party every time they face a major loss. So in 2008, after the Obama election, they had this big debate on where the party should head. They asked consultants to tell them, what should we do? And the consultant firms that came out with a report, they basically told them, shift to Latinos voters, shift to immigrant voters. That's a base that you could win. And the party had the opportunity to do it. And what happened? Sarah Palin happened. Sarah Palin taught them that there was a Trump, the same base that Trump is now using for the election, but she taught them that it was a base that didn't push them to change positions within the party, and that these people were willing to go out and vote. And so the Republicans, instead of focusing on transforming themselves, they were, oh, we have this base, why don't we exploit it? And that kind of explains all the history of the Republican Party up to Trump. And I think that the biggest debate, at least in the short term, is what the conservative movement wants and how it aligns the vision of the conservative movement with voters' identities. Because the big issue right now is that in most of the US youth, and I believe that in Mexico's youth as well, you don't see young people against gay marriage, against equal pay among women, in favor of racism. So the party has some deep thinking to do in order to see how they will address these issues in the sense.
Gun control, right?
Gun control. We see the Parkland kids making a complete shift. And I think that the Republican Party right now is very comfortable thinking that they have maybe 2 or 3 more elections regarding demographics and the Trump base getting older and being able to vote. But the party in the long term does face a challenge on what it will do in the next 20 years when the demographics actually shift a lot. And then the youth, they have like a base that is no longer identifying with the Republican Party's values right now.
And how about, now I'm really going off script here, but just looking at Mexico, do you see a Morena, a new party coming to the stage in the United States? I mean, I think it is, if this continues to happen and the Republicans are reluctant to change, I think they're going to be running out of space. I don't know if it's in this election, but in the next one and the next one and the next one, because as you said, young people are very far away from some of these key issues that they continue to try to defend, which I don't understand why. So there might be a space for something else. I think Bernie and Biden, you know, I mean, these are two very different spaces, even in the Democratic Party. On the, I'm going to say, farther left, more socialist, more European socialist movement, and more central, traditional way of thinking of the United States, free enterprise, etc. So a combo of the middle between the Democratic Party and the old Republican Party. Do you see that possibility? That's for both of you, so you can, you know, take on however you want this.
I think Carlos is better versed on the political science theory behind the American system, and I would be interested in his response. But what I would say is that I do see in the fringes, and like the very, very fringes of the left of the Democratic Party, there might be some tinkling of an idea of we should create something completely different, because what the left of the party represents is not exactly what the moderates, like the Joe Biden's, represent. You know, what the party is fighting for right now, like what their base is right now, which is to say, it's very much to the left of what we saw in 2016 and what we saw with Obama in 08 and 12. The party is moving, but some fringes of the party would like to take it even further, and they feel that where the party is right now won't allow them to go that much further. And so I don't see that happening. I don't see a party splitting into a new, more left-wing party, a more socialist party. I think the system just doesn't allow that. It's so rigid that having 3 parties or 4 parties would make everything more, it doesn't really work. And this is where I would be interested in hearing Carlos's answer. But the idea is there. There is a seed planted within the left fringes of the Democratic Party. That would be my answer.
And like, speaking to what Julia just said, I think that one of the main issues is that we have to think that the founding fathers designed the political system in this way, in a way that they were very afraid of the power, the mischiefs of factions, they call them. They were very afraid that a small group would take control of government and then impose their agendas. And so they decided to design a kind of system that pushed the party system to have 2 parties. They didn't include parties in the Constitution, but they kind of made an institutional design that would push for that solution. And they were very afraid that the United States would split into different interests, and they wanted to push whoever the president was or whoever was in Congress to build these big coalitions that would govern so that everyone got a say. So to think that we might get a 3rd party basically implies having a constitutional reform of the 2-party system. Why? Because the way that votes are assigned right now in the Electoral College, with whoever wins a state getting 50% plus of getting the whole number of votes from the Electoral College in that state, basically makes a 3rd candidate impossible to win, because people will go to the poll and say, there are 2 that are leading. Why would I vote for a 3rd one that won't even get the 50% or get like a set of votes from that end? So it's a never-ending story regarding this. And we've seen it worsening, because now we see parties trying to win the election and competing. Some people have called it the 2-party doom loop. And I guess that to switch it, you would have to have a constitutional convention and change the way that the elections are held.
I didn't think about this when I asked my question, but you're right. I mean, the Electoral College system, it's a problem for something like this. I mean, you would have to think about so many other alternatives. So with this very interesting introduction, let's go to today. And I mean, we are a couple of days away from, I'm going to say, D-Day, or I think D-Day started, you know, a little bit back, because you started to vote already. But where are we? Where do we go from here? Carlos, if you want to start, what's the scenario like today, and what do you think in terms of odds?
So I think that in terms of odds, the approach that we've taken at the podcast is to trust the data and the evidence. And the evidence shows us that Biden is winning by a big margin. And Julia will get into the nitty-gritty details of how polls are faring at this point. But I think that a clear sign of the Biden force in this election is to look maybe not at the states that Biden is winning, but at the states that Biden is not winning. Why? Because in most states, what we're seeing is that Trump is getting a 2% lead in Texas or a 3% lead in Ohio and fighting it. So the fact that these Republican strongholds have Trump winning by a small margin does show that even if the Democratic polls were wrong, there's something going on the Republican side of things that is not working with Trump. And I think that what gave Trump his triumph in 2016 was, Julia Azari, a political scientist, was talking about it, was that he was Trump, he was explosive, and he was a Republican. And that combination gave him victory in 2016, but now that combination is what's dooming him. The volatility that he has brought into the campaign has made it way harsher. I think that it's fair to say that if we had a Ted Cruz right now as president, he wouldn't be faring so bad. But Trump's personality has definitely defined the race. And I think that it's going to be a race that it's going to be defined by COVID. It's the COVID election. People are going to go into the polls and think, am I able to go to school? Am I able to go to work? The answer is no. Then I don't want to remain under these conditions. And I think that that's the main focus in this election.
Julia, what do you think?
We're seeing, I would like to focus on where we are right now. And I think a good not predictor, but a good image of where we're standing is the amazing early turnout that we are seeing. As of today, 82 million ballots have been cast, which is outstanding. That in comparison to the 2016 turnout, that's 60% of the 2016 turnout. And that is just huge numbers. Out of this 82 million, more than 28 million have been votes in person early, and 53 million have been mail-in ballots. This amazing push for early voting is definitely also defined by COVID. A lot of people registered to vote in advance and registered for mail-in ballots in advance because they were afraid of voting in person on election day because of COVID, because of the long lines, because of all the health risks that in-person voting might entail on election day, and putting election workers at risk as well. And so there was a very, very big push by Democratic organizations and also the Democratic Party as well to incentivize people to vote early, and that has paid out amazingly. For example, Texas this morning surpassed this 2016 total votes casted, and they have also one day left.
You mean advanced voting compared to total voting in the last election?
Correct. Early vote in Texas today surpassed their total vote in 2016, which is incredible. And they have one day left of early voting, which is today, and also election day. And based on polling that we know of, around 40% of voters will vote on election day. So that's probably only 60% of the vote in Texas that we're going to get. We might be remaining another 40% of voters that will get to the polls on election day, which is crazy. Texas is reporting over 9 million votes as of right now. And there's evidence that Biden is ahead in Texas in early vote, but Trump does have the advantage among early election day voters, which might make things interesting. All other states that are seeing these huge turnout is, for example,
you talked to me, you and I talked yesterday, and when you told me that there is, even if it's a 3%, which is nothing, chance or whatever that is a 3% lead of Trump, but that the possibility exists that Texas votes for Biden, it just blew my mind. I mean, it's just amazing of where we are and how crazy the political scenario is.
Yeah, well, so that's been an interesting development in the past few weeks. The polls have closed in Texas, and most election analysts had Texas as a lean Trump state. And because of the latest polling in Texas, some might have even moved it to a toss-up. And so it's important to note that the average polling there has Trump up by 1.3 points. It's basically tied. And it's interesting that today Kamala will be in Texas. So the last day of early vote, Kamala will be in Texas. She'll be doing some. She'll be present in McAllen. We don't know her exact agenda yet, but she will be there.
Are you kidding me?
No,
in
no,
McAllen?
no. Yes, she'll be in McAllen today, which is which just shows that the Democratic Party and Biden and Kamala think that they can really win Texas, which would be an amazing turn of events, because Texas is turning blue just based on the demographics, as we were discussing earlier. Texas is a very young state, a very Latino state, and so those demographics favor the Democratic Party. But people didn't think that it could turn blue this early in time. It might be this year, it might not also, but it will in the future be a Democratic stronghold just based on demographics.
Well, and that goes to my question at the beginning of this conversation. If you have California, which is going to be blue, and it's going to be bluer, I think, as time goes by. If New York is blue, if Texas is blue, then I don't know if the Republicans can ever win an election again, right? I mean, that's why I'm so concerned that there has to be a change. And the reason why is because I truly believe that we need checks and balances. We need balance of power, which I think is part of this, founding fathers also philosophy, Carlos. But we have to take it to this century, right? And it's really important to do something about it. This is my main concern, for example, of Mexico. I not necessarily being against specific policies, which I am, of the current government, but the balance of power is extremely important. And so that's why I was very impressed with the Texas situation. And just to continue forward, I will ask Carlos, just so you take it from here, is what's different today than Hillary Trump? Because if we look at 50, what's the name of the site of the polls? 538 and all that. I mean, I remember looking at them, talking to Enrique Perret from the U.S. Mexico Foundation, and I mean the odds look good, maybe not this favorable, but what's different from today than Hillary Trump on these odds?
I think that there are significant differences in the polls, but also in the candidates. And it's a tough answer, but the very first one is that Biden is not Hillary Clinton. And why does that matter? Because from the side of the Republican Party, Hillary Clinton had been a candidate that had been criticized, demonized for the last 20 years of the conservative movement. And from the Democratic side, there was criticism about her ambition, probably even some misogyny on that end as well. But the thing is that Hillary was a very unlikely candidate to coalesce the whole party. She was hated by some, others did not trust her, so she was like a negative candidate. And I do think that part of it is reflecting on the side that Biden is doing much more better among any side of the electorate. The second thing is that just like everyone who saw election night, Democrats this time were really afraid and really concerned that something like this could happen again. So their main objective in this election was, we're going to do everything to get Trump out of the White House. We won't care on whether we get Medicare for all. We won't care on whether we are saving the environment in the next 2 years. The main objective right now is to get Trump out of the White House. And that pushed people to coalesce around Biden and Kamala in ways that Hillary never got to garner that support. So that would be like the main candidate feature or structure that I would tell you is different. And the other thing that is interesting to think looking back from 2016 is that by this time in the election, we had the Hillary personality factor. We had the Comey investigation, which was October 28th. 2 days ago was the anniversary. We had WikiLeaks and we had Russian intervention. And even with all those factors that were Trump barely made it out of the finish line, and Hillary won the popular vote by millions. So if we think that with all those helps and push-ups, Trump barely made it, there is no evidence to show that Trump on his own will do better this time.
Okay.
To add to that response, to that, those narratives that are key, the other thing that we see different in 2016 is the number side, like the data side is different. Biden's lead in the key states, in the swing states, which are Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Arizona, he's leading in all of them, some by a larger by a larger difference, like 8 points in Michigan and Wisconsin. Other are closer, like North Carolina, he's only leading by 1.9 points. But his leads in these states are much better than Clinton's lead in 2016, just days out of the election. And so if we were to have, because a lot of people don't trust the polls anymore, if we were to have a polling error as we did in 2016, which was like 2 to 3 points in these specific states, in some of those, even with a polling error, Biden is still up. And in 2016, Hillary lost because her lead was so small, plus the polling error, it just swung on Trump's way. So that's also an important difference this year.
Quick question there. The Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders endorsement effect, I think also helps, right? On bringing those people, I think that on the Hillary against Bernie situation, I think people that really like Bernie Sanders, a lot of young people, which is also very surprising to me how good he is on engaging with young people, I think hated Hillary Clinton more than Donald Trump, which is, it's amazing to me. Now I think they realize, you know what, we made a mistake. It's better to hate more Donald Trump. I'm talking about the Democratic Party, although I'm open. And as a Mexican, it's very hard to like Donald Trump. I mean, regardless, this is not Republican or Democrat, but it's very, very difficult to like Donald Trump. But that also should have an impact, right, on the turnout of the Democratic Party. And I think they feel more united today than they felt in the previous election.
I think that looking back, at least on what data tells us, and this is like one of the media narratives that the evidence does not hold up, when we see the numbers of Bernie supporters who ended up voting Democrats, it's a high number. It's around 97%. So even if people like Bernie Sanders, like the Bernie Sanders base was from the beginning Democrat. And in the end, they did turn out for Democrats. And I think that what happened with the Bernie candidacy was that it did not harm Hillary internally, it harmed her externally. The Bernie narrative gave Trump a lot of food to attack Hillary on. And so the fact that this time the party united against one and binded against every type of attack or attempts from the Trump administration to fracture the coalition failed. And that is why we have a stronger Biden than we did a stronger Hillary.
I love the fact, Carlos, that you tell me and that you bring me back to science and data, because I think this is one of the things that we have lost. And you say, you know, the evidence doesn't back up what I'm saying, which again, this is why I go to both of you for understanding this process. But I love the fact that we are looking at data and we're looking, because it's not only for election, but I think this is something that has been lost in the political environment. And I think the community, we have allowed for the political environment to go only with narrative and storytelling of lies, or, you know, not fully disclosed numbers and science. And I think this is one of the things that we need to push as a community. And I think this is where the younger generations like you two are extremely important for us to listen to, because we need to listen to data, of course, now to see what the probability of the outcome of the election is. Still, it's a probability situation. But also when we go to policy and talking about where we go as nations, as regions, and as entire planet, we have to look at the data. And I think this is being lost. So I don't know any input you have and any take on data, fake news, social media, and so much information out there, which is very shallow in terms of how educated that information is and how we actually believe it's true.
Well, it's I think in part due to COVID, but also the Biden campaign is pushing for they're really getting their message out of we're going to listen to the scientists, and that not only means for COVID because Biden would take over the pandemic response, obviously starting in January, but I think that goes all around policy issues. So like climate change is also very important. And so Biden and the Democratic campaign, and the Democratic base is really pushing for we're going to listen to the scientists. We're going to look at the data. We are going to follow what the scientists recommend, which is very weird that has been politicized. Like that shouldn't be a selling point. Everyone should be listening to the scientists. But we are at that stage, and that has been increasingly relevant due to the pandemic. And so that is one of the talking points right now, which is scary that we're there, but a reality nonetheless.
And hopefully we can use this as lesson learned to bring it back on track, right? To say, okay, we need to make educated decisions based on science, on data, etc. Go ahead, Carlos. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say that also I think that one of the biggest lessons of the 2016 election that we're seeing now is the media. The media has learned a lot in this last 4 years from not sharing any Trump statement and not fact checking it before reproducing it, to even not buying into the now that it's been revealed that it was a fraud, the whole investigation around Biden's son, Hunter Biden, that was probably set up by a Republican consulting firm. The Trump administration tried to push that story into the media to harm Biden, and the media, even conservative media like the Wall Street Journal, denied the acceptance of this story. And I think that the media has learned a lot on how to push back to an administration that continues to question truth and try to build their own narrative. And I think that this is a lesson, yes, for the press in the US, but similarly to the press in Mexico, which definitely needs to step up their game in questioning government narratives at different state levels.
Yeah. Let me jump to some scenario conversation here, just to look at time. But I would like to just touch quickly, what if Donald Trump wins? And again, I'm very open about it. I hope he doesn't win, but let's say what happens if he wins? What do you see first in the local agenda? Where do you see it going, Julia?
So if Trump wins, I would separate that in two different routes. If he wins through legal disputes, we're going to have a bumpy road ahead of us, because we will see, I think, social unrest higher than we saw during the Black Lives Matter movement during the summer. And so that would put uncertainty and tensions very high up in the US. And so that would make it a rough start for a second term of his presidency. And that would just like kickstart a whole set of actions within the administration that local agenda. I cannot imagine it. I don't know what it looks like. And yeah. I really don't want to get ahead of myself, because if we go down that road, it's just going to get not nice for the next few months. But let's say he wins through pure vote counting and electoral college, as he did in 2016, and there is no social unrest. If we go down that road, I think we would see a local agenda, well, more of what we've been seeing for the past 4 years. So that means another 4 years of polarization, of politicization of the judicial branch, of a political use of the attorney general for personal gains of the president, which is extremely frightening. We will continue to see efforts to suppress vote. We will continue to see efforts to suppress liberties of minorities, especially now that they have a control of the conservative movement has control of the Supreme Court. We will see efforts to take down Roe v. Wade, or abortion, gay marriage could also stand to lose a fight against this very conservative Supreme Court in some states. And so I think that is a scary path ahead of us, but that would just, it's just a democracy would be on the line. Trump has weakened institutions, and 4 more years of his administration would probably just completely shatter those institutions. And
especially, I mean, this is traditionally what we say, right? When you don't have to win re-election anymore. I mean, you have 4 years of really being true to yourself, which is very scary.
Completely.
When we talk about that, right?
Completely, yeah. This election is definitely a referendum on Trump and on what the Republican Party has become. And so if he ends up winning, it means 2016 was not an error. This is what the Republican Party represents, and this is what they will defend. And so that would be a second term of a Trump administration with just like very heightened what we have seen for the past 4 years.
And internationally, Carlos, just to finish on this scenario of Trump, so then we can move to the more likely scenario. But what's your thought on internationally what the U.S. would look like with 4 more years of Trump?
I think that what we have to take into account is exactly what you mentioned, that is that he doesn't have an incentive to re-elect himself. And I think that we will see definitely a harsher administration taking stronger immigration measures, getting the US out of any type of agreements that do not benefit them. Trade, I think, will continue to be protected because the economy is the only argument that Republicans continue to use to get votes at the local, state, and national level. So it's not in their interest to have an economic impasse anytime sooner. But we also have to take into account that up to now, I like to say that the Trump foreign policy is kind of in an attention deficit, in the sense that the reports that we've gotten so far is that the president reads something about the Middle East and he thinks we should do something about the Middle East. And then an advisor walks in and tells him there's a crisis in South America. And then the attention of the administration is South America. And we haven't really seen a lot of significant changes in the international agenda. But what I do think is that Trump will set the precedent for other countries to do the same. So I definitely see an encroachment of Russia and China towards the European Union and towards the West, and that the US won't have the interest nor the allies to stand up to that. So I do think that even if Trump does not do anything directly, the power agenda globally will be reconfiguring beneath his feet and without him noticing.
Okay. Now let's go to the other scenario, because I think, I would also like to talk about Mexico, but as you're saying, I think we'll see more of Donald Trump and Mexico in the same lines, right? Kind of, yeah, trade is okay as long as I don't need to do something about it and put a 232 measure against steel or whatever it comes up next. Or as long as immigration, or as long as security, or as long as I don't have to talk bad about Mexico to get something else, or I'll talk good about López Obrador if it's in my best interest to get some votes this morning and things like that. So I don't think there will be a big change on the trade narrative compared to what we have been seeing, which is, yeah, we'll do trade with you because we don't have any other option, and we probably prefer Mexico than China. But so I think that's what we would get from him. 4 more years, in my opinion, of uncertainty, because he reacts to trade the same way you were saying about international policy, right? If somebody tells him something today, then he'll do something against a specific sector in Mexico, or in Canada by that means too. So with Joe Biden, Julia, what do you think is the biggest change? Because first of all, I think from Mexico, we like to think that we are very relevant for what happens and how, the conversations in the White House. I truly don't believe that's the case. And actually, I want to touch on this before we close, but I think the US is focused on what's happening locally. Then I think internationally, maybe on these big fights, and somebody was saying this week on a webinar that I was in, we are not in the priority list, and that's good. I'm not sure I agree with that. For some things, yes, but for some things, no. But I think local is more important. First of all, do you agree, Julia? And if so, where do you see the big changes on the local agenda of Biden?
So I have the same feeling that you have, that I'm not 100% sure that Mexico not being on the priority agenda is good, because I think we should be on the priority agenda because we share so many things. Security being one of them. I think security cooperation should be on the agenda between US and Mexico, for example. And so a local agenda for Biden largely depends on the amount of power the Democratic Party wins on Tuesday, because a Biden presidency will be very different if they win the Senate or not. If the Democrats have the trifecta of power in Washington, they hold the Senate, the House, and the White House, I can see that there will be a push for an immigration reform, because that if they do get the trifecta, that might only last for 2 years, and so they will try to make the most out of it. So we will definitely see, a dismantling of all Trump norms, meaning environmental deregulation, meaning the lowering of taxes for the richest sectors of the US. So we will definitely see a dismantling of all those previous Trump norms. I think we might see a push for immigration reform, which will be interesting within the party, because the party has several different views of how this should be done. I think the most backed up proposal is the ones that put forward by Julian Castro when he was trying to win the nomination of the party for presidency. So that will be interesting. If they don't get the Senate, it will be a much more complicated presidency for Biden, because we will see a lot of disputes between the legislative and the White House. And the Senate, if Mitch McConnell is still the leader of the Senate, will block anything the Democrats try to pass through Congress, and that would make a Biden presidency, well, slow and just complicated. We will see some dismantling of norms, as I said previously, from the Trump era, but we might be very big changes that need congressional approval will be difficult.
Do you think that this, Carlos, staying on the local, one thing that has been difficult for me to understand, I go to the Black Lives Matter movement. We must do something about it. I mean, Black Lives Matter is not only about African American rights. I think it's about everything that has to do with inclusion. Do you see something dramatic being done in the United States to go back to, I don't know if I want to say to being politically correct, which in part I think we should go back to some of the politically correct norms that we had in the past, because I think it's easier to just get along. But really another big push for rights, for diversity, for inclusion, for really trying to solve this problem of racism, because I think it's extremely important for the stability, the social stability of the United States, and then of the neighbors like us, because it hits us. If in 2050, somebody said this number in another event we had, Julia, right? There's going to be 100 million Hispanics in the United States. We better do something about it, because we are part of that demographics that is discriminated against. So what's your take on that?
I think we're going to see a kind of two-level game in two ways. One is there will be a short-term government of Biden that will be, in the first 2 years, push back everything that Trump did, just as Julia mentioned, important force tasks, committee investigations if they win the Senate, and then a longer-term agenda. And I think that Biden will be aligned with something that Chuck Schumer has also said recently, that is, there will be 3 priorities for him. climate change, economic inequality, and democratic reform. They want to reform the electoral system, the way that judges are nominated, a bunch of reforms that will guarantee that Democrats don't lose out the political game. And I think that one dynamic that we could see this year is that usually the way that Biden and Obama functioned was that Obama took an agenda and Biden had a kind of short-term agenda project. The first term of Obama was economic recovery, and then Biden took on a more international role. So I definitely see possibility where takes the whole racial agenda, mostly because since she was Attorney General, she knows what the crisis in policing is. She knows what racial issues involve. And I think that Biden would be, the vice president will take this agenda. We will support every work that she does. And I will concentrate on the most pressing issues that need like a hard hand in executive power. But it'll be interesting to see also what happens in the internal divisions of Democrats. There are rumors that Elizabeth Warren is looking to be to take Treasury. Bernie Sanders wants to be Secretary of Labor. And if we start to think that Mexico is starting in the USMCA and we have a Bernie Sanders as Secretary of Labor, we will start to see challenges to Mexico's trade, because there is a branch of Democrats that think that everything should be produced locally and will continue pushing on this line. So we will have to see how Biden navigates that divide within the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Is the perfect setup to go to the next segment, let's say, and I would like to wrap up maybe in the next 10 minutes or so, but is the agenda with Mexico, because I do think there will be some substantial differences on how we deal with the United States if Joe Biden wins, which some of them, I think most of them for the better in the medium and long term, but shocking some of them in the short term. So Julia, what's your take? And you said, Carlos, you were talking about environment, for example, and you were talking about income inequality. I think both of them relate to Mexico, one of them because of jobs and one of them because of some of the crazy things we're doing in Mexico. But what's your take on relationship, Biden-Kamala relationship with 4T y López Obrador?
So first of all, I think the most important thing here is that U.S.-Mexico relations under a Biden administration would become institutionalized. And that is to the benefit of citizens of both countries. And I think we should all push for institutionalization of the bilateral relationship so that it has standing no matter who's the president of which country. And so that would be very important. And the second point is that when Biden was vice president, he led the high-level economic dialogue with Mexico under Obama. And so it would be very interesting to see if he restarts a conversation with Mexico to restart this program, which was very successful with the previous administration in Mexico with Peña Nieto, and which should exist no matter who's in office again. And so I think that would be another possible move by the Biden administration with Mexico. We might see, as Carlos was pointing to, some disputes between Mexico and the U.S. not only on labor issues but also on environmental issues. I think we've seen a push from the legislative branch in the past weeks per Mexico's latest move on environmental and clean energy regulation. And so I think that momentum might be passed on to the White House as well if we have a Biden administration. And so some disputes between labor and environment might make the conversation between Palacio Nacional and the White House a bit complicated, but it would be interesting to see how those are received in Mexico.
Yeah, Carlos, we've seen, and Julia, you're mentioning this, more and more, I think, since USMCA, and then we see it with essential sectors with COVID, and now with the budget and the new reforms in Mexico, more and more letters of Congress, of the Senate, to Secretary of State Pompeo or directly to López Obrador. I think sometimes I believe we're pushing the line there on, just one more letter from Congress, one more letter from the Senate. And that's why I think this institutional architecture to how we deal with this is so relevant. Do you see the Americans actually understanding this? I think that those letters, in my opinion, were relevant. But if you continue to have one every week, I just don't know if they become part of the noise.
I think that if we think politically, Democrats and at some point even senators are aware that right now regarding foreign policy, that's the most they can ask out of, or that they can manipulate the foreign policy. Basically, it's led by Trump's impulses. And I think the implication of this with the Biden administration, as Julia mentioned, is that with Biden, and if Democrats take both chambers, the Biden administration will be listening and paying attention to what the Senate is saying and what Congress is saying about Mexico. And maybe Biden will focus on the local agenda, but he will definitely tell the State Department, hey, pay attention to what's going on in Mexico. And if Mexico wants money, if Mexico wants deals, if Mexico wants cooperation, there will have to be accountability for what they're doing. The very fact that even we've heard like Ambassador Landau's declarations or criticism of the current administration, but only off the record, kind of shows that President Trump only wants either things that benefit his image or that maintain the economic situation, but does really not care about the internal situation. And I think that the Biden administration, through the institutional, will try to make Mexico more accountable if they want to reap benefits of the bilateral relationship.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So you're saying it's almost like the only way out right now, because we have no other way of relating and really having a common agenda. So we are forced to just do this, letters of lobbying on the short term. I think that's a great point. And I do believe that it's extremely important that we move to this institutional framework. I do have some concerns with, let me say, in terms of trade with Mexico, with this scenario of Bernie being in charge of labor or some of these matters, because I think there is lack of understanding of what this relationship is and why it's so relevant in terms of jobs, in terms of some manufacturing facilities in Mexico, in terms of the reshoring and nearshoring initiatives, Mexican agriculture, etc. And I believe this is one of the most complex agendas we're going to face, especially if we get somebody from the Democratic Party more on that left, Julia, because it's a very complex issue to discuss, just like immigration, right? But the economic integration of the region, it cannot be taken lightly on just saying, we want things built in the US. That's not as easy as it is, in my opinion. And I think it has this impact on, just to try to close on that, on Mexico being more relevant. Mexico has to be extremely relevant for the United States because we are the #1 trading partner, because of the nationality and the amount of Mexican Americans living in the US, because of the amount of miles we have of border, because of security, because of food, of guaranteeing food supply chains, and certainly other supply chains. But I'll start with the more basic one, the food supply chain. So this is my biggest concern. Are we capable in Mexico? Do we have the talent, the strategy to deal with this? And are we going to be able to send, to have somebody listen to us in the US on these different points of view?
Well, I think, so I think, for example, the visit of President López Obrador in July is it speaks volumes of where Mexico has placed its chips on the bilateral relationship, because I think two presidents having visited Donald Trump, the two last presidents have met with Donald Trump, no, Peña Nieto and López Obrador, and they haven't made the same efforts to meet with democratic leaders. And I think that was a lost opportunity in July. Definitely, probably not the president, but his closest people should have met in public with leaders of Congress, Schumer, Pelosi, because we do need a closer relationship with both parties. Just
and
to
why not the president, Julia, right? If Macron met with them, why
argument
isn't López Obrador going to meet with them, right? With
No,
the leader of Congress.
I agree. There was an argument to be made that the president didn't want to interfere with the election, but probably with meeting with one of the parties, he already did in some sense. But there should be an effort from the Mexican government to really put on the table the importance of this bilateral relationship by meeting with leaders of both parties, because it is in Mexico's interest to get to communicate the importance of the bilateral relationship and all the things you just mentioned to leaders of both parties, because no matter who's in office, we need everyone in Congress and in the White House to understand the complexities and the nuances of the Mexico-U.S. relationships, because we need a more institutionalized framework of the relationship. And so to that end, I think the López Obrador visit in the summer was a missed opportunity to do what you just said was so important.
All right. Carlos,
And
any closing remarks that you want to add to this?
yeah, adding to what Julia said, I think that another mistake that we've consistently made, regardless of who the presidents are, is the complete focus on the presidential relation. Mexico's relationship seems sometimes to fare on whether presidents like each other, whether they have a shared agenda. And if the Trump administration has shown us something, is that the ones who stopped the administration on most issues were the governors who stopped and said, we're not going to detain immigrants in our states, we're not going to take your climate policies. And I think that Mexico's foreign policy continues to take for granted local actors and the weight they have. And I think that the Mexican government should focus, regardless of if Biden wins, on making that stronger relationship with local actors. And the business sector, I think that with Trump's rhetoric of threatening to cancel the NAFTA, probably USMCA, the renegotiation, the business sector, I think, has a task to set in the minds of American consumers and Mexican consumers where these products come from. I don't know if the solution would be, as we've seen these large stamps on Mexican products telling us the amount of sugar, maybe a stamp saying this was made in Mexico or this is a product of the USMCA platform. But if we don't build that awareness of where those products are coming from among voters, then in 10 years, we're gonna be facing another USMCA negotiation or another candidate who will tell you, where have you seen the benefits of USMCA in your daily lives? And people won't have answers to that question because we haven't developed a strategy to show the benefits in our daily lives.
I love your proposal on made in USMCA. I'm going to take that, that idea. I think we should run with it. I think it's extremely important. And that's why I love talking to both of you. I always learn something. I really appreciate the opportunity you give us to debate, to talk about this. And if you don't mind, I think we should have another conversation in a couple of weeks when hopefully the election has been decided, hopefully clearly, and as you said, Julia, by votes, not by going into some legal procedures here. Because I would love to hear your comments about what happened in the election, and certainly we can pin down more how to go to the future and how to improve the relationship of Mexico and the U.S. So thank you very much, Carlos, Julia, as always. Thank you very much for being my teacher on all these issues.
No, thank you so much for having us, Emilio, and we will be happy to come back once the election has cleared off.